And at number 10, we have the Gardevoir GX deck from the 2017 World Championship. This strategy revolved around the, at the time, newly released Gardevoir GX. There's two parts of this card that allowed it to make such a big splash at the largest event in the TCG. Once per turn, Secret Spring lets you attach one Fairy Energy card from your hand to one of your Pokemon. This extra energy enabled powerful damage with its Infinite Force attack. For one Fairy Energy, Infinite Force dealt 30 damage for each energy card attached to both active Pokemon. This card also had a GX attack for one Fairy Energy, which shuffled 10 cards from your discard pile back into the deck. With many of the strongest Pokemon of the time having around 200 to 210 HP, such as Espeon GX, it took around 7 total energy cards on both active Pokemon to get one-hit KOs. Thanks to the combination of multiple Secret Spring activations, double colorless energy, and many opposing Pokemon having attacks which require 3 energy cards, Infinite Force was one of the strongest attacks around. Even if you couldn't pick up a one-hit KO, Gardevoir GX's massive 230 HP meant it could survive multiple attacks while setting up a 2-hit KO. Being able to survive multiple attacks and set up 2-hit KOs meant the deck could also function decently under ability locks like Garbodor's Garbotoxin or Hex Maniac with just one energy attachment per turn. While the deck wasn't being affected by ability lock, the Gardevoir GX strategy had some incredible synergy and versatility at its disposal. The supporter card Acerola could return a damaged Gardevoir and all cards attached to it to the hand, only for Secret Spring and your once per turn energy attachment to immediately set up a fully powered undamaged Gardevoir GX right away. The decklist and many other players used a single Gallade because of the utility provided by its Premonition ability, which lets you stack the top 5 cards of your deck in any order once per turn. Since Gallade shared the same evolution lines as Gardevoir GX, there was little loss to gaining the Stage 2 Pokemon's incredible ability. In a pinch, a player can also use a Gallade sensitive Blade attack to deal 130 damage for 2 colorless energy if they played a supporter card that turn. When combined with Octillery, a Pokemon whose Abyssal Hand ability lets you draw cards until you have 5 in your hand, Premonition almost guaranteed you would draw a useful card. Even without Premonition, Secret Spring constantly attaching energy meant the Gardevoir player's hand size would usually be low enough to draw a few cards. Even though the deck relied on getting multiple Stage 2 Pokemon to play, this wasn't difficult at all to the 2017 World Championship format's wide variety of consistency cards. Bridget and Alolan Vulpix could search for multiple Pokemon cards on their very first turn, and on later turns, Ultra Ball could search any single needed Pokemon. With Tapu Lele GX in the deck, Ultra Ball was also able to search any utility supporter card like the aforementioned Acerola, Guzma, and Hex Maniac whenever needed. Once set up in the late game, Versus Seeker lets you recover any supporter card used or discarded earlier. If a game went very long, the Twilight GX attack could shuffle any number of key items, energy, or Pokemon into the deck. This attack also allowed Gardevoir decks to nullify any damage from a Gardevoir's Trash Lance attack by taking all items out of the discard pile. Gardevoir GX strategies were so versatile in how they played that the card remained a fixture of the competitive meta up until the release of the Tag Team GX Pokemon. And at number 9, we have the 2007 Absol Eeveelution decks. This strategy leveraged multiple different synergistic Pokemon to create an incredibly flexible deck that could adapt to any situation. The deck's most straightforward game plan comes from its two namesakes, Absol EX and Jolteon EX. When put onto your bench, Absol EX's Cursed Eye Pokepower lets you move up to 3 damage counters from one of their opponent's Pokemon to another one of their Pokemon. Also, for 1 dark and 1 colorless energy, Psychic Pulse dealt 30 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon and 10 damage to each of their bench Pokemon with any damage counters on them. When combined with Darkness Energy, which boosted the damage of any dark type it was attached to by 10, Absol could deal significant early damage to an active Pokemon while setting up chip damage onto bench Pokemon. However, the deck still needed a way to initially put damage counters onto bench Pokemon for Psychic Pulse's second damage to apply. This is where Jolteon EX really shine. When you evolve into Jolteon EX, its evolutionary thunder power puts 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon. If you set up a single Jolteon, Absol EX will start flooding your opponent's board with damage counters, putting a lot of pressure on common low HP basic Pokemon like Slugma, Trapinch, and Piplup. If you evolved into multiple Jolteon EX in a single turn, or your opponent already had some damage counters on the Pokemon from earlier attacks, playing an Absol from hand to use its Cursed Eye Pokepower could move damage counters to low HP Pokemon and take KOs without even attacking. If you needed to deal with higher HP Pokemon, Cursed Eyes could move damage counters to power up Jolteon EX's second Bite attack. For 1 electric and 1 colorless energy, this attack dealt 20 damage plus 10 more for each damage counter already on the defending Pokemon. This attack's strength ramped up very quickly and gave the strategies ways to reach large damage counters to KO high HP Pokemon like Empoleon or Rayquaza EX that may otherwise be effective against small chip damage. While just using Absol and Jolteon would be effective, their synergies alone aren't what brought this deck to the World Championship win. Because the deck already played Jolteon, it had access to other powerful Eeveelution EX Pokemon. When a player played Espeon EX to evolve one of their Eevees, the card's Devo Flash Pokepower lets you devolve one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Devo Flash gave the deck yet another way to pressure your opponent's bench by converting higher HP utility Pokemon like Magcargo, Nidoqueen, or Posi Eeveelutions into their lower HP basic stage. This Pokepower was especially devastating against Pokemon evolved through Rare Candy because re-evolving would be more difficult. Another fantastic evolution this deck could utilize was Vaporeon EX. This card's evolutionary swirl Pokepower forced your opponent to shuffle all cards from their hand into their deck to draw 4 cards. Hand disruption in the Pokemon TCG is always powerful, but the card was made even better by evolutionary swirl being one of the few ways to actually punish large hand sizes in the 2007 format. The 2007 format was also a slower paced format with great emphasis being placed on accumulating large amounts of cards in hand, which made Vaporeon access incredibly powerful. Funny enough, Eevee itself was also very useful on its own due to the slower pace of the format. For 1 colorless energy, Call for Family puts any one basic Pokemon from your deck onto the bench. In the modern TCG, there's little purpose in using attacks like this due to better consistency items and overall speed of the game. But setup Pokemon used to be a fundamental part of the TCG. Call for Family wasn't a flashy attack, but it gave Absol Eeveelutions a way to grab any important basic Pokemon straight out of the deck. In the World Championship winning deck list, this could either be further copies of Eevee to allow more explosive future turns, or attackers like Rayquaza and Jirachi EX. This reliability is a large part of why the deck was a World Championship winning deck. Even though it had many moving pieces and different components, a skilled player would always be able to navigate through a matchup. Supporters like Professor Elm's training method provided reliable access to evolutions with the whole-on engine of Mentor, Scientist, and Adventurer, giving the deck reliable basic setup and late game draws thanks to Whole-on Transceiver, searching whichever supporter you needed from the deck or discard pile. Super Scoop Up gave the deck ways to reuse its many Pokepowers. Multi-Energy or Whole-on's cast form meant any Pokemon in the deck could attack if necessary, and boosted the consistency of using many different typed attacks. All of these factors combined to make Absol Eeveelutions one of the best decks of its time, and earn a spot on this list. And at number 8, we have the 2004 Team Magma deck. The 2004 World Championship was the first Worlds event to feature players from all over the world, and is a key part in understanding this deck's success at the event. In the US, leading up to the World Championship, the Team Magma strategy wasn't considered powerful, with most players using Blaziken as the best deck of the format. It wasn't until the event that Western players ever played against the Team Magma deck and learned how powerful it was. Team Magma was one of the best decks of the 2004 format, but most Western players didn't know that until Japanese players swept the event with the deck. With that historical fun fact out of the way, what actually made the deck so powerful? The main focus of the deck was Team Magma's Groudon, one of the most efficient non-EX attackers at the time. For 1 fighting and 1 colorless energy, linear attack dealt 20 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. This attack not only gave the deck some early pressure on Dimension Pokemon, but also set up Groudon's second attack. For 2 fighting and 1 colorless energy, Pulverize dealt 50 damage plus 20 more if the defending Pokemon already had 2 or more damage counters on it. While both of these attacks are terrible by modern standards, they were both efficient and well-costed attacks for the 2004 format. For a direct comparison, the second best deck at the 2004 World Championship was Blaziken, a Stage 2 Pokemon whose Fire Stream attack dealt 50 damage to the active Pokemon and could deal 10 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon. Dealing 70 damage for 3 energy with a basic Pokemon was just something very few other cards could do, making Team Magma's Groudon one of the best attackers of the time. In the early game where Pulverize wasn't set up, linear attack let Groudon pressure key targets like Torchic with early damage. Groudon could also take advantage of Darkness Energy's damage boost because it was a dual type Pokemon that counted as both fighting and dark type. All of these factors meant Team Magma's Groudon was closer to the power level of a Pokemon EX than it was a single price Pokemon. Team Magma's Groudon was certainly a good card, but it wasn't the only reason Team Magma was a successful deck. Team Magma decks also had access to Team Magma's Claydol and Team Magma's Camerupt, 2 Pokemon whose Pokepowers provided excellent utility. With Overheat Pokepower, Team Magma's Camerupt could put 2 damage counters on itself to attach any basic energy to itself. After attaching extra energy, Team Magma's Claydol Magma Switch Pokepower could move that energy onto any other Pokemon, usually Groudon. The combination of these 2 cards gave Team Magma decks an extremely potent resource loop that allowed the deck to constantly switch between attackers and powering up new ones. Helping set up this board was Team Magma's Zangoose, another Pokemon with the Call for Family attack which could put any Team Magma basic Pokemon directly onto the bench. Zangoose's Team Play attack allowed it to double it as an attacker right after setting up the bench. On top of this fantastic Pokemon lineup, the deck also had access to trainer cards no other deck could utilize. Team Magma Conspirator could search any combination of 2 Team Magma basic Pokemon or basic energy cards. Maxi was a unique supporter card that let players put any Team Magma Pokemon from their hand or discard pile directly onto the bench, letting players potentially cheat out or recover the Stage 1 Claydol or Camerupt. The deck also had access to Team Magma Ball, an item that searched either any Team Magma Pokemon or any basic Team Magma Pokemon based on a coin flip. There was even a special energy card that was exclusive to the Team Magma archetype. Magma Energy provided 2 of any combination of Fighting or Darkness energy when attached to a Team Magma Pokemon, but discard itself at the end of the turn. This energy card gave the deck early aggression by powering up quick Pulverize or Team Play attacks before the full Claydol Camerupt engine was online. Magma Energy was also really useful in cases where attacking with Claydol's Dark Hand attack might be a reasonable option. The main reason to consider doing this was that Blaziken EX, a common fixture of Blaziken decks, had a psychic weakness and could be knocked out with a single Dark Hand attack, and some chip damage from either Groudon's linear attack or Desert Ruins. All of these excellent factors combined with an element of surprise led Team Magma to occupy 3 of the top 4 finishers in the Masters Age division, and being the only deck in the Pokemon TCG history to win all 3 Age divisions. The only reason this deck isn't higher on this list is because it fell out of the meta almost immediately after the Worlds format due to stronger new cards being introduced. And at number 7, we have the 2019 Mewtwo and Mew Tag Team GX deck. Most players call this deck Mew 3 because it has Mew and Mewtwo, so that's what the deck would be called throughout the rest of this video. This strategy was built almost entirely around Mewtwo and Mew GX's Perfection ability. Perfection let this card use the attacks of any GX Pokemon on your bench, and more importantly, in your discard pile. This specific variation of Mew 3 was built around the supporter card Welder, which lets you attach up to 2 Fire Energy cards from your hand to one of your Pokemon and then draw 3 cards. During the 2019 Worlds format, Welder was the best generic way to put multiple energy cards into play in a single turn. The card was intended to bolster Fire-type Pokemon with high attack costs like Reshiram and Charizard GX. Not only did Welder serve the same purpose in Mew 3 decks, as they usually played Reshiram and Charizard GX too because of its high damage output, but it also accelerated Mewtwo and Mew GX closer to using attacks with multiple colorless energy in their cost. Mewtwo and Mew GX decks use Welder to power up a suite of attacks the card wasn't necessarily designed for. The supporter allowed Mew 3 decks to take full advantage of a wide variety of individually powerful attacks that usually couldn't fit into a single strategy together. For example, the 2 energy provided by Welder allowed quick and repeated use of Naganadel's GX Venom Shot attack. For 1 Psychic and 3 colorless energy, Venom Shot dealt 170 damage to any Pokemon at the cost of discarding 2 energies attached to itself. Venom Shot was an important angle of attack for the Mew 3 decks at the time, as it meant any low HP bench Pokemon could be picked off, especially any Dendende GX a player might have set up on their initial turns. Another excellent attack that was usable off of a single Welder was using Solgaleo GX's Turbo Strike. For 2 colorless energy, Turbo Strike dealt 120 damage and attached up to 2 basic energy cards in the discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. Mew 3 decks discarded a lot of cards in the opening few turns through both Dendende GX's Dende Change and search cards like Mysterious Treasure or the Giant Hearth. So having an attack which both dealt chip damage onto opposing GX Pokemon and accelerated energy to follow up attackers was extremely valuable. The world's winning deck list played a multitude of other utility attackers, each fulfilling specific niches which may arise over the course of the game. Espeon and Deoxys GX's Cross Division GX attack could spread 10 damage counters around your opponent's board to take multiple knockouts against low HP Pokemon. Even better, if 3 excess energy were attached when the attack was used, it could spread 20 damage counters instead and devastate any setup relying on low HP Pokemon like Malamar or Pidgeotto. On the first turn going second, Cobalion GX's Iron Rule GX attack could be used to prevent your opponent from attacking during their next turn, buying a crucial turn to find either stronger attacks to copy or ways to disrupt your opponent's strategy. Latios GX's Tag Purge prevented any opposing tag team Pokemon from damaging Mewtwo and Mew GX, potentially winning games on its own if your opponent had no way around the effect. Lastly, Magcargo GX's Lava Flow could deal upwards of 300 damage to opposing Pokemon by discarding energy attached in cases where the Mew 3 player already used their GX attack and couldn't capitalize on Reshiram and Charizard GX's Double Blaze GX. In order to best capitalize on the energy advantage and power spike provided by Welder, the deck used many ways to see as many cards as possible. Dendende GX's Dende Change let you discard your entire hand and draw 6 new cards, both setting up the discard pile with GX Pokemon and ideally drawn into Welder. Cherish Ball could search any GX Pokemon out of the deck to establish either Mewtwo and Mew GX on the bench, or to grab any utility attacker to discard later. Mysterious Treasure and Giant Hearth search Psychic-type Pokemon or 2 Fire Energy cards respectively at the cost of a discard from hand. The strangest discard outlet that decks played was Electromagnetic Radar, an item that discarded 2 cards from hand to search any 2 Electric-type Pokemon GX from your deck. The 2019 World Championship was the first tournament Mewtwo and Mew GX was legal for, and the card maintained some place in the metagame throughout almost all of its time in Standard. And at number 6, we have the 2014 VirGen Genesect deck, a strategy colloquially referred to as VirGen. This deck was built around VirGen EX and Genesect EX, 2 cards released in the same set designed to shake up the metagame. Since the cards were pretty much designed in a lab for each other, most VirGen decks didn't deviate from the main strategy. Set up Genesect EX and start knocking out everything. To understand what made this strategy so potent, take a look at VirGen EX. For 1 grass and 1 colorless, Emerald Blade deals 50 damage and lets you attach up to 2 basic grass energies from your deck to one of your Pokemon. Almost all this energy was getting into Genesect EX. Emerald Blade allowed for fast energy acceleration on 2 other attackers, while at the same time dealing extremely important chip damage to opposing Pokemon. That 50 damage was highly relevant due to Genesect's Megalo Cannon. For 2 grass and 1 colorless, Megalo Cannon dealt 100 damage to the active Pokemon and 20 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. If you manage to set up your attacks in such a way that the 50 Emerald Blade damage, the 100 Megalo Cannon damage, and the 20 damage dealt to a bench Pokemon were all dealt to the same card, it would total up to 170 damage. That amount of damage lined up well against the plethora of 170 HP Pokemon EXs that were present during the 2014 Worlds format. The most popular deck in the top 32 of the World Championship wasn't VirGen Genesect, but rather Yveltal EX with Garbodor, a strategy whose main attacker had 170 HP. Other common 170 EX Pokemon were Deoxys, Mewtwo, Keldo, and opposing VirGen and Genesect EX. The combination of Emerald Blade, Megalo Cannon, and its bench damage totaling up to 170 was a massive factor behind what made the deck so powerful that it took 5 of the top 8 spots of the 2014 World Championship. It's also worth noting that a VirGen deck could also 2-hit KO 170 HP Pokemon without the use of Megalo Cannon's bench damage thanks to the tool card Muscle Band. This card has a simple effect of boosting all damage dealt by the Pokemon it's attached to by 20. Muscle Band on either VirGen or Genesect meant Genesect's spread damage could be put on an undamaged Pokemon to make attacking with them later in the game much riskier. Genesect wasn't reliant on 2-hit KO math, and had ways to 1-hit KO problematic Pokemon thanks to the A-Spec card G-Booster. This tool card gave Genesect EX it was attached to access to the G-Booster attack. This attack dealt 200 damage and ignored all effects of the defending Pokemon at the cost of discarding 2 energy cards attached to it. Although the cost for G-Booster was high, requiring 2 energy discards and not being able to play any other A-Spec card in the deck, its power was well worth it. There was not a single card in the game that could survive G-Booster. The attack was especially devastating if it could be used twice in a row. The main way to do this was by using Emerald Blade to charge up the first G-Booster, then playing multiple energy switch to move energy cards from VirGen EX back to Genesect. When combined, VirGen made Genesect one of the scariest attackers in the format. When you also factor in both of these Pokemon's very strong abilities, it becomes clear why the deck occupied over half the top 8 spots at Worlds that year. The former's Verdant Wind protected all Pokemon with Grass-type energy attached to them from status conditions. This effect was very sought after in a format with Hypnotoxic Laser and Verbank City Gym. The latter Pokemon EX had one of the best abilities in the game's history. Genesect's Red Signal lets you force any of your opponent's bench Pokemon into the active spot whenever you attach a Plasma Energy from your hand to it. Red Signal was a highly repeatable gusting effect that took minimal effort to set up. This ability, combined with G-Booster, meant VirGen decks could pretty much KO any Pokemon they wanted to whenever they wanted. When a strategy has both some of the best attacks and best abilities in the format, you get a World Championship winning strategy. And at number 5, we have Zoroark Garbodor deck. This strategy revolved around 2 individually powerful cards, Zoroark GX and Garbodor, to create an extremely consistent deck with tools to address every matchup. The main face of the deck is Zoroark GX, a card that provides a strong attack and nearly unmatched card advantage. Once per turn, this card's trade ability lets you discard 1 card to draw 2 cards. For 2 colorless, Riotous Beating deals 20 damage for each Pokemon you have in play. Zoroark gave any strategy that included it both consistent draw power throughout a game, as well as a good attacker capable of either setting up 2-hit KOs against high HP Pokemon, or outright knocking out any lower HP evolving Pokemon. With 2 to 3 trade activations per turn, thanks to having multiple Zoroark in play, players could find any card from their deck the turn it was necessary. Most importantly, trade helped locate otherwise hard to search special energy cards like Double Colorless Energy to enable Riotous Beating for just 1 energy attachment. Zoroark GX puts pressure on your opponent to act quickly in disrupting your setup. If your opponent couldn't disrupt your hand with the likes of the continuous flow of new cards would bury any chance they had of winning. Trade could draw into disruptive one-off cards like Enhanced Hammer or Kartana GX that weren't otherwise very reliable. Very few cards were actually unsearchable in the 2018 World Championship deck list. 3 copies of Tapu Lele GX with 4 copies of Mysterious Treasure to search the former for its Wonder Tag ability made finding any one specific supporter card trivial. If you needed a non-psychic type basic Pokemon, Brigette could put any 3 basic Pokemon from the deck directly onto the bench. If you use Brigette on turn 1 going first, something impossible because the player going first could use a supporter card during this area of the game, you'd immediately have a strong setup that could switch to attack down your opponent's Pokemon while drawing cards. Zoroark GX and the plethora of other consistency cards practically guaranteed you'd get set up, and the strategy had ways to counter any opponent trying to set up faster or too aggressively. For 1 Psychic, Garbodor's Trashalanche attack dealt 20 damage for each item card in your opponent's discard pile. Trashalanche is widely regarded as one of the strongest individual attacks in the Pokemon TCG, for how quickly its damage can get out of hand. Against Garbodor decks, players had to be especially aware of how many item cards they want or need to use to establish their game plan. With too many items in the discard pile, Trashalanche could reach high enough numbers to one-hit KO many Pokemon GX. Even if Trashalanche wasn't getting a knockout on its own, just setting up around 120 damage for a later KO with Riotous Beating was more than worthwhile. What made the inclusion of this Garbodor in the deck especially powerful was that it easily allowed for the use of the other Garbodor and its Garbotoxin ability. As long as this card had a tool card attached to it, each Pokemon in play had no abilities. It may seem counterintuitive to shut off your own Zoroark's trades, but locking other ability-reliant strategies like Malamar under Garbotoxin was more than worthwhile. It's also important to note that when playing your own Garbotoxin, you were able to determine when the ability lock actually went into effect. One of the deck's most devastating plays was setting up a turn 1 board of multiple Zorua and Trubbish and following up with multiple evolutions into Zoroark on the next turn. Then, after drawing 4 to 6 cards with trade and finding the requisite tool card, you could evolve into Garbodor. By sequencing in this way, the ability lock is applied to your opponent after you've already gained a massive amount of card advantage. If your opponent managed to break this lock with a card such as Field Blower, you'd be more than able to set up a lock again thanks to further trading and an item card that hasn't been brought up yet. Arguably, the deck's best tool available to it was Puzzle of Time. This card had 2 different effects based on if you played 1 or 2 of it at the same time. If you just played 1, it lets you rearrange the order of the top 3 cards of your deck. This was never how you wanted to use Puzzle of Time, because the second effect is so powerful it got banned in the expanded format. If you played 2 Puzzle of Time at the same time, you were able to put any 2 cards from your discard pile back into your hand. This item lets you recover any resources lost by discarding to earlier trades that got knocked out earlier in the game, or cards that were just used at any point. This item card meant Zoroark decks using it would almost never run out of resources as games went long, giving the strategy inevitability that it will always win in the long game by recycling the best possible cards against an opponent. All of these multifaceted elements of the strategy combined to create one of the best decks the Pokemon TCG has ever seen. And at number 4, we have the LuxChomp deck, a deck built around the fantastic SP engine and 2 excellent level X Pokemon. In case you aren't aware of how the SP or level X mechanics works, here's a quick explanation. An SP Pokemon was just a high-powered basic Pokemon with the SP tag that was referenced on the effects of other cards. A level X Pokemon was a special type of card that could only be played over its basic stage while the Pokemon was in the active spot. Also, a level X Pokemon was treated as having the same name as its base form, meaning you could only run a total of 4 copies for both the base and level X combined. Although the individual Pokemon in this deck were exceptionally powerful, it was actually a supporter card that was most pivotal to making this deck function at such a high level. Cyrus's Conspiracy that added to your hand any supporter card, any basic energy card, and any trainer card with the Team Galactic's invention in its name from deck to hand. Team Galactic's inventions were a set of trainer cards that supported SP Pokemon. Thanks to SP Radar, a Team Galactic invention, Cyrus's Conspiracy could functionally search any SP Pokemon in the deck while also grabbing whatever basic energy card the Pokemon required at the same time. The supporter also searching any supporter card on top of this guaranteed great setup over a few turns, something many decks could afford as the 2010 Worlds format revolved around long games. If you needed to search multiple Pokemon or get basic Pokemon that SP Radar couldn't search, grabbing out a Pokemon collector would set you up. If you needed to see a fresh hand of cards, Professor Oak's new theory could shuffle your hand into the deck and give you a new 6 cards. In many cases though, the best supporter to search with Conspiracy was another copy of itself. Conspiracy for Conspiracy and 2 other cards gave a steady, reliable flow of resources. A good resource flow isn't what players remember this deck by though. What made LuxChomp arguably the best deck its entire time in the standard format was its incredible aggression provided by Luxray GL level X, Garchomp C level X, and Team Galactic Inventions. To start things off, let's take a look at Energy Gain. This tool card reduced the attacks of any SP Pokemon it was attached to by 1 colorless energy. In the modern TCG, any tool card that reduces an attack's cost usually requires a condition like having more prize cards remaining to be met. Without any restrictions aside from only working with SP Pokemon, Energy Gain made the already well-costed attacks of SP Pokemon even more efficient. With how searchable this card is with Cyrus's Conspiracy, any player evaluating how good an SP Pokemon's attack was did so with the understanding it would cost 1 less energy than was printed. Luxray level X had offensive utility combined with an excellent attack. For 1 electric and 1 colorless, Flash Impact dealt 60 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon, ignoring all weaknesses and resistances, but had the downside of dealing 30 damage to one of your bench Pokemon. This attack gave LuxChomp decks an easy way to one-hit KO a plethora of evolving Pokemon like Ralts and Ghastly, or low HP basic staples like Spiritomb and Sableye. If you needed a little bit more damage, you could also use the attacks of Luxray level X's previous stage, something all level X Pokemon could do. Bite lets you deal some chip damage on the very first turn before a level up is possible. You could attack on the first turn going first during the 2010 Worlds format. Trash Bolt dealt 10 more damage than Flash Impact with the higher costs in cases where you needed either the extra damage was necessary or you couldn't level up. With some Crobat Gs and a few Poke Turns, even 80 HP or higher Pokemon like Claydol were at risk of fainting to a single Flash Impact or Trash Bolt. The LuxChomp player could also guarantee these KOs thanks to Luxray level X's Poke Power. When leveled up into, Bright Look lets you force any of your opponent's Pokemon into the active spot, meaning any crucial Pokemon could be picked off at a moment's notice. This card also, having no retreat costs, mattered enormously for the deck's success. If a Pokemon got knocked out during your opponent's turn, you could promote a Luxray GL to the active spot, level up to use Bright Look, and then switch into a different attacker if necessary. The other attacker this strategy most employed is the other half of its namesake, Garchomp C level X. When leveled up, Healing Breath restored all damage on your SP Pokemon, making racing SP deck without taking one-hit KOs very difficult. What really made Garchomp level X so good was its attack. For 3 colorless energy, Dragon Rush dealt 80 damage to any one of your opponent's Pokemon at the cost of discarding 2 energies attached to itself and not allowing the same attack next turn. This attack added yet another element to LuxChomp's strategy of picking apart your opponent's board, guaranteeing a knockout against the popular Claydol and many other utility Pokemon. Dragon Rush is what made double colorless energy so good in LuxChomp, as this single energy attachment was all you'd need to use the attack if you had an energy gain attached. 80 damage for a single attachment was an unheard of amount of efficiency, especially when that damage can go to any Pokemon on the board. Helping back up these 2 attackers were 2 other Team Galactic's inventions, Poketurn and Pokespray. Poketurn lets you put any Pokemon SP and all cards attached to it into your hand, allowing for crucial reuses of Luxray level X's Blight Look, Garchomp level X's Healing Breath, or Crobat G's Flash Bite for extra damage outside of attacking. This trainer card made setting up KOs against SP decks difficult because they could always get picked up off the board and have their effects reused multiple times throughout a game. Power Spray is a trainer card that only has an effect during your opponent's turn. If you have 3 or more SP Pokemon in play, when your opponent tries to use a Poke Power, you can use this trainer card from your hand to prevent that effect from happening. This is one of the few mid-turn interruptions in the TCG's history, and made playing against LuxChomp an occasional nightmare. If your hand was bad and relied on an Uxie setup or Claydol's Cosmic Power to fix, a single unknown Power Spray from your opponent could snuff out your only chance at winning. Both the strong level X attackers and the flexibility of Cyrus's Conspiracy with the Galactic Inventions made LuxChomp a top-tier menace from when the cards were all printed until they rotated out. And at number 3, we have the Fusion Mew deck. This strategy has one goal: speed. Fusion Mew is widely regarded as one of the fastest decks in the game's history, easily being able to draw a majority of its deck in the first few turns if necessary. This potential for very quick setups gave players an angle to construct their decks no other archetype could dream of getting away with. The most important card in Fusion Strike Mew decks is by far Genesect V. Once per turn, this card's Fusion Strike system lets you draw cards until you have the same number of cards in your hand as you did Fusion Strike Pokemon in play. Fusion Strike system would frequently draw up to 5 or 6 cards in hand, thanks to how easy it was to get lots of Fusion Strike Pokemon in play. The deck usually aimed to put around 2 to 3 Genesect V into play alongside Mew V, and the occasional Meloetta, allowing the deck to easily draw 10 or more cards per turn off of just abilities alone. This Pokemon also had the Techno Blast attack, which dealt 210 damage, but the Pokemon couldn't attack near the next turn. While Genesect V would rarely ever attack on its own, Techno Blast was one of the best attacks to copy with Mew VMAX. Mew VMAX was the main attacker for the deck, using the Cross Fusion Strike attack to copy the attacks of any bench Fusion Strike Pokemon for just 2 colorless energy. Genesect V's attack was frequently the best one to copy, since it did the most reliable damage and the card could work around the attack's downside. Normally, you'd need to wait a turn to attack, but if you could just switch out your active Mew VMAX, this restriction would go away. Since this Pokemon had no retreat cost, you could switch between 2 copies of itself to avoid the lock all game long. Sometimes though, you didn't need to bother working around Technoblast's restrictions at all, thanks to having Meloetta in play. This card's Melodious Echo attack dealt 70 damage for each Fusion Strike energy attached to all of your Pokemon. This energy card counted as all types of energy when attached to a Fusion Strike Pokemon, made them immune to the effects of opposing Pokemon abilities, and was trivial to get into play thanks to Alessa's Sparkle, a supporter card that attached 1 energy from your deck to 2 of your Pokemon. On the first turn of the game going second, it wasn't hard to set up Meloetta with 3 Fusion Strike energy in play to deal 210 damage and KO a 2-prize Pokemon. In the late game, Melodious Echo can deal up to 280 damage if you get all 4 Fusion Strike energy in play at the same time. This already excellent damage could also be boosted further by Choice Belt or Power Tablet to a 1-hit KO 3-prize Pokemon VMAX. The latter item was especially potent since you could play multiple copies in the same turn to empty your hand while boosting damage by a maximum of 120 for that turn. Genesect V and the Fusion Strike system was far stronger the fewer cards you had in your hand. So Fusion Mew tended to be built in a way that allowed players to easily play every card in their hand. One way to go about this was by playing very few supporters, with the world's winning deck list only having a total of 6. Another way was by loading up on cards that discarded other cards when played, lowering the player's hand size even further. The card Fusion Mew was best known for using for this purpose was Cramomatic. To play this card, you have to discard 1 other item card from your hand. When played, you flip a coin. If heads, it lets you add any 1 card from your deck to your hand. If you flip tails, you get nothing. In any other deck, Cramomatic is a very high-risk card since you lose 2 items for nothing. In Fusion Mew, you can just redraw on your lost cards with the Fusion Strike system. The same is somewhat true for playing 3 copies of Forest Seal Stone. When attached to Pokemon V, this tool card lets that Pokemon use the Star Alchemy V-Star power to search any 1 card from the deck. Very rarely would players ever consider playing a second copy of this card because it becomes useless when Star Alchemy has already been used once. But in Fusion Mew, every redundant copy of Forest Seal Stone that wasn't discarded by Ultra Ball or Lost Vacuum could be attached to one of the many Pokemon V on the field and replaced by a Fusion Strike system draw. With such unmatched draw power, Fusion Mew could end its first few turns with very few cards in deck, leaving only good draws remaining or in hand while threatening your opponent every turn with unmatched attacking power. It was these aspects of the deck that made it a standard format powerhouse the entire time of its legal status, despite multiple direct counters to the archetype being printed. And at number 2, we have the 2008 Gardevoir Gallade deck, affectionately known as GG. This archetype was focused entirely around the Ralts evolution line that provided access to both Gardevoir and Gallade. Gardevoir was the focal point of the deck. This Stage 2 Pokemon has the Telepass Pokepower and the Psychic Lock attack. Once per turn, Telepass lets you copy the effect of any supporter card in your opponent's discard pile as the effect of Telepass. You couldn't use more than 1 Telepass per turn, but that didn't matter. If you put a single Gardevoir into play, this Pokepower gives you an immediate resource edge over your opponent because you get to play an extra supporter card every turn at no additional cost. Some of the best supporter staples to copy were Pokemon search cards like Celio's Network, Roseanne's Search, or Bebe's Search. If you needed card draw to find special energy or certain items, Steven's Advice was a commonly played card to copy. Make no mistake, Telepass is one of the best effects ever printed in the history of the TCG due to how it breaks the once per turn supporter rule and gives one player an enormous amount of advantage. Gardevoir would have likely seen competitive usage as a utility Pokemon with just this Pokepower alone, But the designers also decided to give this card one of the best attacks the game has ever seen. Psychic Lock costs 1 Psychic and 2 colorless energy, dealing 60 damage and preventing your opponent from using any Poke Powers during their next turn. Ability Lock is one of the most disruptive effects a Pokemon can have, and it's almost never in effect given to a Pokemon attack due to the lack of counterplay to an applied lingering effect. As an example of how much of a difference having the lock beyond attack makes, take Glaceon Level X, another Pokemon with the Poke Power lock legal during the 2008 World Championship format. Since this Pokemon's Chilly Breath Pokebody only applied while in the active spot, the commonly played Warp Point could break the lock, allowing a crucial Claydol activation. There was no way to get out of Psychic Lock. Many top strategists didn't bother using many Poke Powers because of how omnipresent Gardevoir was. Psychic Lock's damage was also nothing to scoff at, with other common Pokemon like Empoleon and Magmortar being in 2-hit KO range with the extra damage counter provided by Jolteon Goldstar. With a Lake Boundary in play, Psychic Lock 1-hit KO'd opposing Gardevoir and Gallade. Speaking of the latter, Gallade was a 1-hit KO machine. Psychic Cut costs 1 Psychic and 2 colorless, dealing 60 damage plus 20 more for each prize card you flip face up when you use the attack. Since the prize cards remain face up for the rest of the game, you could be cautious about how many cards are flipped up as to not make further Psychic Cuts ineffective. If your opponent's deck had Pokemon with 120 or less HP, like Magmortar, revealing 3 prize cards that deal 120 damage took a 1-hit KO while still leaving 3 prize cards to be flipped up for another 120 damage attack later. If you just needed 1 crucial KO on a high HP Pokemon, you could reveal all of your prize cards, take the best one that you see, and focus entirely on Gardevoir for the rest of the game. Gardevoir and Gallade's 3 energy attacks were made trivial to power up due to some of the best special energy cards the game has ever seen. Double Rainbow Energy and Scramble Energy. The former provided 2 energy of any type while attached to an evolved Pokemon, but reduced all damage dealt by that Pokemon's attacks by 10. This downside is well worth playing what is functionally a stronger double colorless energy in evolution decks. Scramble Energy is much more nuanced, and heavily influenced the play patterns of the 2008 Worlds format. While attached to an evolved Pokemon, this energy provided 3 energies of any type, but only if you had more prize cards remaining than your opponent. This card made taking any early prize card insanely risky, as a Scramble Energy player could start attacking with 3 energy cost attacks and quickly outpace anything the aggressive deck could do with the momentum swing. The existence of this special energy card pushed aggressive strategies out of the 2008 Worlds format, and as the stage 2 deck with the best Pokemon around, Gardevoir Gallade decks quickly rose to prominence as the best deck of the format. As a deck, Gardevoir Gallade was so fundamentally powerful that it actually had a resurgence in the 2010 Worlds format with a reprinting of Double Colorless Energy, placing second at the event and making GG one of the few archetypes to see high-level success at multiple World Championships. And at number 1, we have the 2012 Darkrai Mewtwo Terrakion deck. The idea behind this deck is simple. Play all of the good cards. This deck represents what many players consider the worst format in TCG's history, since Darkrai EX and Mewtwo EX were leagues above all other cards in the game's history. Darkrai EX decks, usually playing Mewtwo EX, took up 7 of the top 8 spots in the 2012 World Championship, with a Mewtwo EX Celebi deck being the remaining top 8 spot. Starting off with a card so prolific a term was coined to describe the mirror match, Mewtwo Wars. Mewtwo EX has 2 attacks, only the first of which is relevant. X-Ball costs 2 colorless energy and dealt 20 damage for each energy attached to both active Pokemon. X-Ball's cost could be fulfilled entirely with a double colorless energy, adding 40 damage on its own. If the opponent's active Pokemon had 2 energy attached, this attack dealt 80 damage for a single energy attachment. X-Ball was an attack that immediately pressured opposing Pokemon and only got stronger the more energy your opponent committed to the board. Mewtwo EX was also one of the most splashable cards in the format. Its best attack only cost colorless energy, and that attack was very powerful, so many decks played it. Unfortunately, since this Pokemon had a weakness to its own typing, Mewtwo EX was the best way to beat opposing Mewtwo. An X-Ball attack with 5 energy in play between both active Mewtwo dealt 200 damage, whereas 4 energy total would only deal 160 damage. This interaction put heavy emphasis on a deck's ability to put 3 or more energy onto a single Mewtwo in a turn. If your opponent attached a double colorless energy to their Pokemon, you could attach your own double colorless energy and another energy from other source to take the first KO. Afterwards though, your opponent could use their own double colorless energy wielding Mewtwo to KO your Mewtwo, which now has 3 energy on it. This could keep going until the player who initiated the Mewtwo war had taken all 6 prize cards, or one player ran out of Mewtwo's. To win the Mewtwo war, different strategies took different approaches. Some decks use Elected and Celebi to accelerate energy onto Mewtwo and initiate the war. Shaman, a card the world's winning deck utilized, could move energy around the board to set up the first KO against an opposing Mewtwo. Another option was to try and avoid the Mewtwo war by dissuading the card's usage. If a player attached a single energy to a bench Mewtwo EX, their opponent may not be comfortable with benching any of their own Mewtwo EX or attaching any kind of double colorless energy. If your opponent does commit to attacking with X-Ball, you could just attach a double colorless energy to the Mewtwo with this single energy already and start off the war on favorable turns. Attaching a single energy preemptively did come with its own risks, mostly being vulnerable to Shaman plays combined with Pokemon Catcher, so players sought other ways to avoid the Mewtwo war. This is where Darkrai EX came in. Make no mistake, the card was individually absurd without the context of Mewtwo wars defined in the format, but it also thrived in a format defined by the Psychic-type Pokemon. While in play, this Pokemon's Dark Cloak ability gives all of your Pokemon with dark energies attached to them no retreat cost. This ability meant you could freely switch around attackers and adapt to any situation at no cost. This card also had the Night Spear attack, costing 2 dark and 1 colorless to deal 90 damage to the active Pokemon and 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Thanks to the card's Psychic-type resistance, reducing all damage dealt to it from Psychic types by 20, Darkrai EX was one of the best ways to avoid a Mewtwo war. In fact, Darkrai was ridiculously good against Mewtwo. Thanks to its Psychic resistance, a Mewtwo EX with just double colorless energy attached would only deal 80 damage against a fully powered up Darkrai, while it threatened a 2-hit KO in return and put 30 damage counters somewhere else on your opponent's bench. If the opponent wanted to set up a 2-hit KO, they would need to attach a third energy onto their attacking Mewtwo, making it vulnerable to an opposing double colorless energy wielding Mewtwo. With an Eviolite attached, Mewtwo just couldn't do anything relevant to Darkrai. The 30 extra bench damage also did wonders to win the Mewtwo wars, since a Mewtwo with 30 damage on it could be knocked out by an X-Ball with only 4 total energy on both active Pokemon instead of 5. Any Mewtwo with 20 more damage on it became a liability to attach energy to. Outside of its various positive interactions against Mewtwo, Darkrai EX was just individually amazing. Night Spear 2-hit KO every single Pokemon EX in the game, and 1-hit KO every relevant 1 prize Pokemon. Dark Patch made powering up the first Darkrai easy, and Shaman moving energy around and Dark Cloak giving free retreat made switching between damage and undamaged Darkrai trivial. Once again, the card was so powerful that its most reliable answer was opposing copies of itself. If Darkrai EX could 2-hit KO all Pokemon EX, then it could also 2-hit KO other Darkrai EX. Being the most reliable answer didn't make it the best one though. Terrakion was a card that fit perfectly into metagame as it could 1-hit KO Darkrai, while being a giant pain to return KO. For 1 fighting and 1 colorless, Retaliate dealt 30 damage plus 60 more if one of your Pokemon was knocked out during your opponent's last turn. Also, Land Crush dealt 90 damage for 2 fighting and 1 colorless. Both attacks dealt 180 damage to Darkrai EX due to its fighting type weakness. In a Darkrai mirror match, if your opponent took a KO with Night Spear, it was common to promote the active spot any Pokemon with a dark energy attached, play Terrakion, attach a fighting or prism energy to it, bring it to the active spot since you had a free retreat with Dark Cloak, and then play Shaman to move the dark energy onto Terrakion before using Retaliate to deal 180 damage and take 2 prize cards. With only 2 energy attached, opposing X-Balls wouldn't be able to KO Terrakion, and your opponent wasn't going to be putting another Darkrai for fear of Land Crush on the next turn. On the following turn, any Darkrai left on your opponent's bench could be crashed in for another 2 prize cards, buy an extra energy to use Land Crush card plus Pokemon Catcher. The single prize Pokemon put opposing Darkrai players in a very tough position. Remove this Pokemon or risk losing 4 prize cards to 1 attacker. With all the individually good and quite honestly overpowered cards in the deck, backed up by the staple cards of the era, it's easy to see what made this deck far beyond the power level of all other strategies available in the 2012 Worlds format, with Darkrai EX even winning the 2013 World Championship as well. Darkrai Mewtwo is easily the best World Championship deck in the game's history. And that's it. We hope you enjoyed this look at some of the best decks in the game's history. If there's any deck from the game's history you think deserves a spot amongst the best, let us know down in the comments.